Have you ever woken up from a nightmare only to find that the nightmare is real? This was the reality for many Los Angeles residents during the mid-1980s. Imagine the fear that gripped the city. The whispers of a phantom in the night, a shadowy figure known only as the Night Stalker. His reign of terror, as horrifying as it was inexplicable, would haunt the dreams of many for years to come. This is the terrifying story of Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker. Richard Ramirez was not born a monster, but his life was a series of unfortunate events that led him down a dark path. Born in El Paso, Texas in 1960, Ramirez was the youngest of 5 children in a Mexican-American family. His father, a former policeman turned laborer, was known for his violent temper. From an early age, Ramirez bore the brunt of his father's outbursts, shaping the beginnings of a troubled upbringing. But parental violence wasn't the only factor that marked the start of Ramirez's downfall. As a child, he sustained 2 major head injuries. The first came when a dresser fell on him at the age of 2, and the second, more severe, occurred when he was knocked unconscious by a swing at a local park. After these incidents, Ramirez began experiencing frequent epileptic seizures that further complicated his early life. Perhaps the most influential factor in Ramirez's path to darkness was his cousin Mike. A decorated Vietnam War veteran, Mike often shared explicit war stories and photos with young Ramirez. These gruesome tales and images, laced with violence and death, twisted Ramirez's perception of reality. Mike became a dark role model, even teaching Ramirez military skills like stealth and killing techniques. These early experiences, a blend of familial violence, personal health struggles, and a distorted introduction to the concept of death and violence, set the stage for the horrors to come. As a teenager, Ramirez began to show signs of his future monstrous self. Even at a young age, Richard Ramirez was no stranger to the grim and macabre. He found solace in the shadows, where he began to explore the dark underbelly of the human psyche. His fascination with the occult, specifically Satanism, only deepened as he grew older. This interest wasn't just a passing phase or a teenage rebellion. For Ramirez, it was a way of life, a creed that he would follow till the end. His exploration of the occult was dangerously coupled with his growing dependence on drugs. Ramirez started experimenting with substances early in his teenage years. What began as casual use soon spiraled into a full-blown addiction, further isolating him from reality. This descent into substance abuse not only clouded his judgment, but also fueled his violent tendencies. In tandem with his drug use, Ramirez's criminal activities also began to escalate. From petty thefts and burglaries, he graduated to more serious offenses. These early crimes were not just about material gain for Ramirez. They were a means to exert power, a way for him to dominate and control. He reveled in the fear he instilled in his victims, and with each crime, his confidence grew. His adolescent years were a chaotic mixture of drugs, crime, and a growing fascination with the occult. He was spiraling into a dark abyss, and there seemed to be no one around to pull him back. Instead of seeking help, Ramirez embraced this darkness, allowing it to consume him. His life was a ticking time bomb, and it was only a matter of time before it exploded. The stage was set, the character was in place, and the plot was about to unfold. Richard Ramirez was on the cusp of becoming the monster that would haunt the dreams of many. By the time he was in his early 20s, Ramirez was ready to unleash his inner demons. In 1984, Los Angeles residents started to experience a new kind of fear. A chilling dread crept across the city of angels as the sun began to set each evening. For the first time, darkness became synonymous with terror, and the night was no longer a refuge but a hunting ground for a new form of evil. This was the year when Richard Ramirez, later known as the Night Stalker, began his reign of terror. The city that never sleeps was kept awake not by the glitz and glamour of Hollywood, but by a monstrous predator lurking in the shadows. Ramirez, with a chilling disregard for human life, unleashed an unprecedented wave of violence and brutality that left the city paralyzed with fear. His methods were brutal, his victims selected at random, making everyone a potential target. Breaking into homes under the cover of darkness, he committed unspeakable acts of violence, leaving a trail of horror in his wake. His crimes were not driven by a lust for wealth or a thirst for power, but by a perverse delight in inflicting fear and suffering. As the death toll climbed, the city was gripped by a fear that was both palpable and pervasive. People started to double-check their locks, some even went as far as to move out of the city. The once bustling nightlife of Los Angeles dimmed, as people chose the safety of their homes over the risk of becoming the Night Stalker's next victim. Ramirez's reign of terror wasn't just about the physical harm he inflicted, it was the psychological torment. The way he turned homes into crime scenes, the way he made every shadow seem threatening, and the way he transformed the city of dreams into a city of nightmares. In a span of just over a year, Ramirez had become the embodiment of every person's worst nightmare. The name Richard Ramirez would forever be linked with a time when darkness descended over Los Angeles and the city lived in the shadow of the Night Stalker. In August 1985, the reign of the Night Stalker came to a dramatic end. Richard Ramirez, the man who had held Los Angeles in a grip of fear, was finally caught. But it wasn't the police or the FBI who nabbed him, it was the very community he had terrorized. In a twist of fate, Ramirez was recognized from his police sketch by residents of an East Los Angeles neighborhood. They chased him down, cornered him, and held him until the police arrived. It was a cathartic moment, a reclaiming of power by a community that had been living in fear for far too long. The subsequent trial was nothing short of a media circus. The courtroom was packed daily as people sought to catch a glimpse of the man who had become a living nightmare. Ramirez, ever the showman, reveled in the attention, flashing a pentagram drawn on his palm and declaring himself a servant of Satan. Despite his theatrics, the evidence against him was overwhelming. The jury found him guilty of 13 counts of murder, 5 attempted murders, 11 sexual assaults, and 14 burglaries. In November 1989, 4 years after his reign of terror began, Richard Ramirez was sentenced to death. He would spend the rest of his life on death row in San Quentin State Prison. But even behind bars, the shadow of the Night Stalker loomed large. He received fan mail and even marriage proposals, a morbid testament to the fascination his crimes had sparked. His death in 2013, from natural causes, marked the end of a dark chapter in California's history. The terror of the Night Stalker was finally over, but the scars he left behind would never completely heal. His name would forever be etched in the annals of true crime as a reminder of the evil that humans are capable of. But amidst the darkness, the courage of a community that stood up to their fear and brought him to justice shines a light on the indomitable strength of the human spirit. Richard Ramirez may be gone, but his legacy of terror lives on. Let's take a moment to reflect on the lasting impact of Ramirez's crimes. His reign of terror left an indelible mark on his victims and the city of Los Angeles. Those who survived his attacks were forever scarred, carrying with them the heavy burden of trauma and fear. The City of Angels, too, was forever changed. The sense of security was shattered, replaced with a pervasive fear that lingered long after Ramirez was captured. Ramirez's life ended in prison in 2013, succumbing to lymphoma. But his death did not erase the fear he instilled or the lives he took. Those wounds are still healing, the echoes of his crimes still reverberating. And yet there's an undeniable fascination that surrounds Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker. He's become a figure of macabre interest in the world of true crime. Books have been written, documentaries made, and his name often whispered in the dark corners of crime forums. This fascination is not an endorsement of his heinous acts, but rather a deep-seated human desire to understand the incomprehensible. Ramirez's story forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth that evil can exist in the most ordinary of places, in the most ordinary of people. It serves as a chilling reminder of the darkness that can lurk in the human soul. It's a darkness that we strive to understand, to learn from, in hopes of preventing such horrors from repeating. So, while Ramirez the Night Stalker may be gone, his legacy of terror lives on, not just as a memory of a nightmare past, but as a stark warning for the future. A warning that urges us to remain vigilant, to look out for one another, and to fight against the darkness that can reside within us. Even though the Night Stalker is no more, his story serves as a chilling reminder of the darkness that can lurk in the human soul. Richard Ramirez's story is a terrifying tale of how a troubled life can spiral into unimaginable darkness. From a scarred childhood, through a descent into malevolence, and ultimately to a reign of terror that held an entire city in its grip, Ramirez's journey was a nightmare lived in the waking world. His crimes, horrific and haunting, have left an indelible mark, not only on his victims but on society as a whole. This tale is a stark reminder of the importance of addressing mental health issues and the catastrophic consequences that can result from neglect. It underscores the necessity of vigilance, community, and the courage to confront the darkness. In learning from this story, we can hope to prevent such horrors from recurring. The story of Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, is a chilling reminder that sometimes the monsters are not in our dreams but in our reality.